I am now based in London, but I lived in the States for a couple of years, so I do know a little bit about this market. And Nielsen, for those of you not aware, is the market research body that measures music consumption in the States. We provide all the data to Billboard for them to do their charts, and we also do a whole bunch of consumer research and insight work around what's happening in the States and other countries in the world. But today it's all about the US market. So 15 minutes to talk about the trends that are happening in the US. So what are we seeing? I need to stand all the way over here. Right. So ultimately, it is a very healthy and growing market in the US when it comes to consumption. So the way that we measure music consumption in the US and similarly around the rest of the world is looking at albums and adding together tracks at a ratio of 10 to 1 and streams at a ratio of 1,500 to 1. And what we see is last year, the US market was up 12.5% in terms of consumption, which is fantastic and has been driven predominantly by streaming. So last year, just in the US alone, there were 400 billion on-demand audio streams of songs, which is a huge, almost 60% increase on the year before, which was a almost 80% increase on the year before that, and before that it doubled and doubled. So streaming has unsurprisingly exploded and continues to grow at a remarkable rate. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you see what's been happening with albums and track sales. So last year, there were 170 million albums sold, either physically or digitally in the US, and that over the last 2 years has decreased almost 30%. Digital albums have seen an even bigger decrease over the last couple of years at 36%, and digital tracks, so that's your iTunes downloads, fallen off a cliff. So down 43% in the last 2 years. And this year we're seeing a similar trend where they're down 25% year on year. So digital tracks down, everything digital and physical down, and streaming increasing. So now we take a look at how that breaks out and look at specific genres, because they're all very, very different. So the top 2 lines on this screen are the industry total. So the way this works is the blue line is physical albums, the purple is digital albums, the orange digital track sales, and the green on-demand audio streams. And that's percentage of the volume that contributes to that genre. So overall, you can see those top 2 lines, the change in green. So now streaming accounts for over 50% of all music consumption in the States. But when we look at different genres, it really varies. So rock, for example, is still a very physical album-driven market, and that's driven by a lot of catalog content. So there's not a whole bunch of new rock albums coming out that are doing horrendously well, but there's a lot of old heritage artists who are still selling a ton of vinyl and a ton of physical albums. And the same with country music. The country music fan is a lot older. They generally tend to still buy albums, be they physical, sometimes digital, and they also listen to a huge amount of radio. Electronic dance music, if you're putting out a physical album in electronic dance music, then you're kind of screwed because nothing is happening there. And then pop and R&B, very streaming driven. Also looking, and I quite like this chart. So this is looking at how this breaks out quarter by quarter. And I think what's really interesting here is you can see the orange line is digital song sales. So you can see the decline quarter by quarter. When we look at on-demand streaming, you can see those last 2 columns, how they go up quarter by quarter. But then interestingly, in that final 4th quarter, that key kind of music consumption period, the impact that physical and vinyl has. Certainly a lot of, and in 2nd quarter as well, there's a lot of vinyl sales because of Record Store Day, and something similar in the 4th quarter. But yeah, the really key quarter when it comes to physical sales for gifting, for new releases. So let's talk a bit more about vinyl. Now, there's been a well-known resurgence of vinyl in the last couple of years, but this is what it actually looks like in America. So back in 2010, we sold 2.8 million vinyl albums, which accounted for 1% of all physical music sales in that market. In that year. Last year, we sold 14 million vinyl. I thought I genuinely thought we'd reached peak vinyl in 2016. I was like, that's it, we've increased, we've had 10 years of growth, blah, blah, blah. But no, we continued to grow last year, albeit at a slightly lesser rate. And now vinyl sales account for 14% of all physical music sales, which is great because vinyl is an expensive product, so it means more money for the music industry. And interestingly, the change in vinyl also comes from the fact that more of that vinyl is catalog than it used to be. So back in 2010, 46% of all vinyl sold was catalog. And catalog is anything that is over 18 months old. So anything that's over 18 months old and has gone out of the chart. So Adele was current for a long, long time, but counts as catalog. But last year, 64% of all vinyl sold was catalog. And in fact, does anyone know what the top selling vinyl album was last year? It was, in fact, the top two were by the Beatles. That's how catalog we're talking about. And like, did you know that?
No, I just approve of it.
Oh, you just approve of it. But yeah, there's a lot of the the heritage artists that are selling on vinyl. And then this. So I still have my Sony Walkman. I'm waiting for cassettes to make a comeback. I just wanted to share the fact that last year there was this 35% increase in cassette sales year on year. I also want to say that this might not be the same as vinyl, because a lot of this was driven by Guardians of the Galaxy and the fact that they released the soundtrack for 1 and 2 were both released on cassette, and I think that drove a lot of this increase in cassette sales. But record labels are releasing more cassettes. Maybe they are going to be the new vinyl. Maybe that's a trend that we're going to see. So that's what we're seeing in the overall music consumption, the general trends in the industry: streaming up, sales, physical, digital down. What does that mean for the charts? So these are the top 10 artists of last year. And what do we see? We see that there are no bands. There is one woman. There are 7 Americans, 2 Canadians, and Ed Sheeran. And most importantly, there are 7 R&B artists in the top 10 artists of last year. And that's ranked by overall consumption, so that's taking in albums, digital and streaming. And do you know who the top artist of? So Drake was the top artist of 2017. Do you know who the top artist of 2016 was? Anyone want to take a guess? Drake. Well done, Stu. Yep. So Drake is killing it. Also killing it is R&B. 2017 was absolutely the year of R&B in the States. So, and now we're going to test my knowledge of who these people are. So, Post Malone and Migos, multiple successes. Kings of R&B, they were all in that top 10, are Drake, Future, and Kendrick. And then there have been a lot of new up-and-coming R&B artists that have done phenomenally well. So we have Kyle, Lil Uzi Vert, and Cardi B. So it really was a phenomenal year for R&B, hip-hop. I've got 5 minutes left. Shit. Right. I knew 15 wouldn't be long enough. Also, what else are we seeing? We are seeing crossover of music in different genres. So 1.3 billion streams in the US alone for Despacito. Interestingly, I think the collaborations that we saw a huge amount of last year that we've talked about a bit in the panels on the last couple of days about crossing genres, phenomenally prevalent and only going to continue. So Nicki Minaj was queen of collaboration. She was on 7 different artists' songs last year in 2017. And then we see things like Sam Hunt, Body Like a Back Road, the biggest country song of last year. Is it country? Is it pop? Does it really matter? So there's a lot of those collaborations going on. Ed Sheeran, Beyonce, whatever. And we're going to see more of that in 2018. What else? So, I don't even know if I've got time for all of this. Right. So, what do we know about the music consumer? Streaming is up. They're spending more time streaming. So but only 41% of the time that they spend listening to music is spent listening to streaming. That is driven by teenagers, and they listen predominantly to audio streaming services and video streaming. The video streaming consumer, Hispanic population, which is obviously huge in America and very important and very young, they spend more time with video. We also know that people don't generally choose video or audio streaming services. They are more likely to use one of both. We know that streaming, the amount of time spent listening to streaming over the last 3 years has increased significantly. So back in 2015, it was 32% of listening time was spent listening to music on streaming services. Now that's increased. And again, if we're talking about trends, it's just going to keep continuing to increase. When it comes to paying for streaming, over 1 in 4 people say that they pay for a music streaming service. So 29% of people, all of this data is taken from our Nielsen Music 360 consumer survey that we do every year, are paying for a music streaming subscription. And interestingly, we ask a bunch of questions around, do you pay, do you not pay, why do you not pay? So of the people who don't pay, 89% of them said that in the next 6 months they're unlikely to subscribe to a music streaming service. And when we ask why, it's still all about price. So it's people who feel that they don't think they're gonna make the most of the service, it's too expensive, why would they subscribe when they can get it for free? So those questions that have been dogging the streaming industry, for want of a better word, for the last couple of years around how do they convert free to paid still exist. But saying that, Spotify, Apple Music streaming subscription numbers are growing rapidly. And I think all of that points to a very positive future for streaming services. And then finally, live music. So I didn't want to talk all about recorded. So live, obviously, hugely important, partly because when it comes to what people spend their money on with music, they spend over 50% of the money they spend every year on music, on live music, and going to concerts, going to music festivals. On the right-hand side, we've got the percentage of people who go each year. And going to clubs with live DJs. So live, still very important, growing in importance to a degree. And over half of the people who are in the US attend some sort of live music event. So trend-wise, what do I think is going to happen in 2018? So will we see the death of digital ownership? It's certainly looking that way. The trend is very much down with regard to digital albums and digital track sales. I think voice and the voice assistants are very interesting in terms of how that's going to affect the streaming market. So historically, the barrier to entry, back 50 years ago, the barrier to entry was like you had to leave the house and go to the record store and buy a record and have some money and then have something to play it on and then physically put it on. Now all you have to do is walk into a room and say, Google, play me, or Alexa, play me this. So the decline of barriers to entry, I think, are going to prove very interesting in terms of what happens with music and consumption. Globalization, so the success that Despacito had, the success that Spanish language content has had in the States over the last year, I think is going to continue, but also where is that next big global hit going to come from? And which language is it going to be in? Is it going to be India? Is it going to be China? BTS, the Korean pop band, which I hope Summer's going to talk about, had a top 10 album last year in America. That's huge, and I think there's going to be more of that. More cross-genre, hopefully not more Ed Sheeran and Beyonce, and live is going to absolutely continue to be important.
Smashed it.
Done.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone.